We are going to do our week 6 lecture as a recording. So welcome to the lecture. We are going to focus on framing theory for this week's lecture. So let's look at today like what we're going to talk about. So we will try and set up a definition of like what is framing. Then we will look a little bit at what are the origins of this theory, which goes back to key scholars like Goffman and Entman. And then we try and see what kind of frames that we can identify in a specific context, maybe in things like news stories in particular. And also like how do we adapt a framing analysis for interviews, which is what our projects are focusing on in our assignments. So that brings us to our third theory. So we have two more that we will be looking at later. But last week we were looking at agenda setting. So let's kind of recap that really quickly and why that is important for us to think about framing as something that is different from agenda setting and how it differs as well. So in agenda setting, like we were talking about the importance of this issue salience, which is that certain media organizations, they operate with certain agendas, and even like in social media context, like we can adapt or identify these kind of agendas. So we were talking about how in particular agenda setting is a theory about which issues become prominent in specific contexts and why something becomes more important than others. But I think there's a difference between agenda setting and framing, and it's important that we kind of understand what this difference is. So, if agenda setting focuses more about the issue or how an issue becomes important or salient, but in framing, it's more about how a specific issue is presented. So we can think of like what is the presentation of an issue, like how do we see a specific issue and how we are made to see that issue as well. Yeah, that's the difference. So in agenda setting, it's more about like what the issue is, but in framing, like how specific that issue is kind of presented. So we'll talk about this like how that becomes the case in framing analysis in particular. So in the case of agenda setting, like we were looking at how agendas like shape the considerations people have in mind when making judgments about issues. So like what kind of issues become important or how they become important kind of sets the tone for people to decide what kind of issues are important. But framing kind of lends to that, but framing is about how that specific issue is sort of maybe addressed, characterized, or presented in a specific environment. So we kind of try to see how that kind of is done in framing as well. Yeah, so I think it's first important to think about defining framing, like what is a definition of framing, like how we can kind of try to understand the definition of framing. So Robert Entman is our key scholar who came up with this idea of framing and actually defined framing in a specific way. So we can kind of read what he tried to set up as framing. So to frame is to select some aspect of a perceived reality in such a way as to promote a particular problem definition. So a key word there is this idea of problem definition. So we can kind of talk about what that is, but mainly sort of what he suggests is that usually an issue is presented through a problem, like it's situated within some kind of a problem, whether it's through some casual kind of interpretation, or maybe there's like a moral ground or like a moral evaluation for that specific issue, or there's kind of like a treatment recommendation, which is like providing like a solution to that issue, or how that issue is kind of treated or described in that specific news item or specific sort of context that we're looking at. So the concept of framing consistently offers a way to describe the power of a communication text. So that is also, I think, important for us to focus on. So it's this idea that the a communication text has a kind of power, and actually through a framing analysis, like we're trying to maybe dissect that idea of power, like where exactly is that power sort of resting in a specific communication text as well. So frames, or like an analysis of frames, or trying to identify what these frames are in certain news texts, or in other communication texts, or in our project context, this would be like social media. So what are the frames that are kind of operating to present a certain issue in a certain way, kind of also helps us to understand how they influence, how messages actually influence human consciousness, and how they shape our decision making processes about certain ideas, ideologies, or social or cultural contexts. So how do we sort of form opinions? How do we relate to an issue through different frames as well? So like I said earlier, problem definition here. So that's a key terminology that Robert Enman kind of proposed to think about framing. So we can kind of think of a problem definition as this idea that in a framing analysis, like problem definition is actually concerned with the problem's root causes, stakeholders, boundaries. So it could be that so there's some kind of a issue that is being discussed, but it is situated in some root cause or some kind of a background which we can identify as a problem. So we look at like some examples of how we can do that, but as a key terminology that is related to framing, problem definition is something that we need to familiarize ourselves with as well. So here, like he's proposing that problem definition is the process by which media texts identify, diagnose, and construct a specific situation as a social issue requiring attention. So basically, like we can think of it as so there's some kind of a background where this issue is constructed on. So it's kind of grounded in some kind of a background, and that background has a as a kind of a definition or some kind of a problem where this issue is like based on as well. So frames, so the other aspect is that this idea of frames, like they call attention to some aspects of reality while obscuring other elements. So that's a bit of a juxtaposition of like two dynamics, right? So frames kind of help to provide an idea of reality, but it also kind of obscures that. So it also provides a distorted view of a real issue. So there could be two sides to how an issue is framed in a media and communication text. So there could be instances when there are real issues that has been highlighted through frames, but also like others where they have been obscured. So framing in this light plays a major role in the exertion of political power, and the frame in a news text in particular is really the imprint of power. So again, that idea that there's a kind of embeddedness of power within a text. So how we present that text to an audience, whether it's a social media post, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a news text. So any videos, even a selfie, so we can kind of think of these different sort of communication texts. So how does it like provide a kind of power? How does it imprint a kind of power when it's being presented in a certain way is something that we can look at. So that all kind of sounds like very conceptual, but we can look at like a few examples about how this has happened. So I thought like, because we always talk a lot about sort of political issues, I thought of picking up a couple of popular cultural stories because this is a good opportunity for us to think of like this kind of popular cultural news, but to also think of how this soft sort of formats of news can still create very specific kinds of problems, and also how they can be framed in various ways. So I guess like some of you may be sort of maybe you remember this story being circulated in the news lately. So it's when the Wuthering Heights film, like when it was first premiered, the main actress, so she's also an Australian actress, so Margot Robbie, the main actress who stars in the Wuthering Heights film, wore this necklace, which is a cultural artifact, but the necklace was actually something that represented the royals in the Taj Mahal saga in India. But yeah, so the background of this is that this necklace was actually an artifact that Britain obtained from India during colonial times, right? So, so when this actress turned to this show with this kind of a necklace, which was an artifact, it created a very colonial sort of connotations, and some of the news articles that covered this news. Was actually reporting this in a very specific frame that signaled colonization and sort of had a discussion about colonial sort of elements of history. So there was less focus on the film itself, or the Wuthering Heights film, and then the premiere, or the glamour aspect of the whole premiere. But the main sort of issue in this story, as you can see, like with the headlines and the way that this story has been positioned. So a main, or like a key analysis here is building on that problem of colonization, right? It's a story about a film premiere, but actually the issue here that it has been constructed in the story is that around that historical background, or that historical debate of colonization. So that is the problem definition. So that is what we call a problem definition, where the key issue here has been like centered on, or grounded on that issue or debate of colonization. Um, so I guess like we can identify like what these articles are trying to do. Like they're trying to set like actually decolonial frames, right? So they're trying to decolonize this idea of glamour, and this actress sort of turning up to this premiere wearing an object that was taken from this country during colonial times. So it's actually positioning this artifact as kind of a colonial object. But the point of these stories, I think, are to decolonialize this debate around glamour and this culture. And the cinematic kind of expression as well. So you can see like in the headlines in particular, like this reference to these ideas around decolonizing the context of sort of cinema and glamour that kind of comes around with that. So it's the same news story, but we can see like in some reports, like they've repurpose that story to focus on a much more sort of a glamour kind of a frame. So from that decolonial sort of elements. So if you look at this story, like it's more about the red carpet sort of, and how valuable this necklace was, and that another famous past kind of actress, Elizabeth Taylor, wearing this earlier as well. So it's kind of like glamorizing that whole sort of idea around the artifact. So there's much more focus here on this article towards that glamour sort of idea. So I guess what we did here is we looked at like a couple of news articles, and we tried to sort of identify what kind of frames that are present in this article. So here, like, we're just looking at the headlines and maybe like the photographs and sort of captions here, but we can clearly see that these stories are trying to decolonize the idea of glamour, while some stories are actually trying more towards framing this as a story about a film premiere and nothing else, but it's more about sort of glamour and glamorizing this artifact, which was quite controversial in the other two articles. So that's the idea of like identifying frames. Like, how do we sort of break these frames that are embedded in certain media and communication texts. There are a couple of aspects that we can think of when looking at a framing analysis like that. So we can think of frames as a macro construct and also a micro construct. So a macro construct kind of refers to a larger or like a broader sort of sense of how a frame refers to modes of presentation. So maybe journalists or communicators used to present information in a certain way that resonates with existing underlying schemas within their audiences. So that is like how they organize their content in like a broader sense. So in the earlier article, we can see that some of the articles try to sort of place it within much broader definitions, much broader sort of conversations around colonization. But also as a micro construct, like framing describes how people form impressions. So like maybe like what are the ways that people actually receive these frames, like how do they understand these frames. So at at a micro level, so that is at an audience level, how do people actually deconstruct these frames, like how do they actually understand these frames. So it is in one way at a production level, like where people who produce the media text, like how do they create these kind of constructs, and on another level the micro construct, like how do people actually create impressions around this kind of frame. So that is the audience element. So the people who are actually consuming the text, how are they forming kinds of impressions around this kind of frame. So that is the idea here. So for us, I guess in our projects, like we can kind of think of it more in terms of our social media context. So we can change this ideas around journalists and communicators to even like social media audiences who are also like producers, like producing and using the content at the same time as well. So how do they then kind of create this kind of constructions at a level of creating the text, but also the audience, like the audience who consumes this text, how are they actually receiving and understanding these texts as well. And yeah, so there's this idea called traditional cascade model of frames, which means that yeah, a cascade is kind of like a waterfall, right? So there's like an effect that cascades from a certain point of power. So there's a message that kind of is delivered from a point of power, from a hierarchical kind of a point of power, and it reaches audiences through journalists or people who are reporting on that news. So I mean, typical sort of news conferences, we can see like administration or politicians, like they're the ones who are actually setting the frame for the interviews, for the content that they're actually issuing to the journalists who are kind of here or asking questions and so on. So it's really sort of we can see like where the messages originate from, so where the power is, like so it kind of has a bit of a flow or a cascade towards journalists or people who actually create the text, but the information actually comes from a point of power as well. So yeah, so it could be like snippets, images, content that is taken into news content, and larger events that are like much more focused on like very specific issues. So I mean, we can think of the political climate today, like the international conflicts that's happening. So we can see like it's a very big picture, but sometimes the issue is very, very specific. When we look at media texts in particular, like in the news, maybe it's more about like fuel crisis or something, but when we actually have a larger conflict that is impacting everyone in the world, but maybe there's a specific issue that has been picked up, like the fuel crisis or something like that. So it's that cascade model of frame. So there's a point of power, and from that point of power a message is kind of delivered to a set of people like journalists or communicators who take that message and create the content for their audiences. So that is the idea of like the traditional cascade model of frames. So we can kind of also look at like what this idea called competing frames, like that in a media text or like a communication text, that we can see like diverse frames and different contexts of frames as well. So we can think about especially like things like the pandemic and what kind of happened in that context as well.